to have you all around. As we like to say around here, good to be seen by you. Of course, good to see you and good to be heard by you if you're listening just on the podcast. We, on Tuesdays, have a chance to talk about politics. Rob Ryersey and Dan Dietrich with us today. Dan, thank you for filling in for my parts of the duties last week. Appreciate it. Thanks for being around.
My pleasure.
Okay, and that's it. Yeah, we'll bring you back
Get
on
rid
the
of that
screen.
guy.
For those who are just listening on the podcast, we just said thanks and cut him, and we're moving on to other things now. But thank you, appreciate it. Our daily podcast is a chance for us to take a look at what's happening in the world, see it with some positive, hope-filled, but open eyes, and say, what can we do about it? How can we be engaged and be around? We appreciate all of you being in here with us. We talk about politics on Tuesday with Rob Ryersey, who's the Vote Common Good political guru and organizer, because Tuesday is the day when we've chosen, for the most part in this country, to have our political opinions expressed at the ballot box. But look, every day should be a day we participate in our economy, in our society, in our politics, in all the things that make us a country. You should do that all every day, and don't just set aside your politics for once every 4 years, once every 2 years, or only the first Tuesday of the month. So we talk about politics. Mondays, we talk about news. Boy, yesterday was a fascinating conversation with a guy who wrote a book about Joe Biden's Catholicism. I thought it was really, really great.
Yeah.
And Wednesdays, we talk about faith. Thursdays, we hit up on important topics of our day. A bit of a potpourri on Thursdays. And on Fridays, science. And boy, we've got a loaded docket for our coming Fridays.
Can we just pause for a second and
days.
Talk about your pronunciation of the word potpourri? Potpourri?
Yeah, potpourri. Potpourri. You say potpourri or potpourri?
Potpourri.
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 Oh,
Yeah.
I see. Potpourri.
Yeah. All right. That was good. I like that.
Potpourri.
Potpourri.
These
are the important discussions you get on the Vote Common Good politics.
Do you know who doesn't understand potpourri? The French. All right. So it's a potpourri on Fridays, but on Tuesdays, it's Politics Day, and we're going to do a little recap of what a year it has been since last Tuesday, the first Tuesday of March, because while it was March 3rd, today's March 2nd, but this Tuesday, a year ago, boy, Rob Ryersey, the world was different. It was the morning of Super Tuesday, which meant that it was the day when a whole lot of states were going to decide on who their pick was to be the Democratic candidate for president of the United States. And at that point, it was still unclear if it was going to be the senator from Vermont, if it was going to be the former mayor from South Bend, Indiana, if it was going to be the senator from Massachusetts, if it was going to be the senator from Minnesota, or if it was going to be the former vice president.
Never going to be the senator from Minnesota.
No, probably wasn't.
Or if it was going to be the former vice president.
Or the former vice president. And as it turned out, South Carolina had its say, and then, boy, on Super Tuesday, the whole rest of the country fell in line behind Joe Biden, which actually, I know it had a lot to do with the recommendation and the support from James Clyburn from South Carolina, Congressman of South Carolina. But it felt to me, for the better part of that political season, all the way back into the fall, that it was kind of Joe Biden's thing, and somebody could take it from him. But just the fact that he was so well known and was such a force, even though his campaign had struggled so severely. But on this morning, a year ago, hardly knew that what was going to happen. And in some ways, our political season is too long. You've talked about that,
Yes.
with some passion. But in other ways, man, they didn't really pick a candidate until that Tuesday. And then it even took a while, took another month or two. And then we had an election in November. So, in some ways, it's under a year. It's 6-7 months of the official, this is the candidate, and the candidate is off and running. So anyway, a year ago, boy, the world looked different. We were living on a bus with Cole Hillman. Good to see you on the live chat, Cole, and a bunch of others. We're traveling around the country. We felt like everything was out in front of us. Boy, we've made our way now to so many of the primary states and the caucus state, and we were doing our Vote Common Good work, and the whole country was kind of clicking along. and COVID was in the air, literally and figuratively, and we had no idea. So two big monumental things in the political life of this country: who the next candidate was going to be for the Democratic nomination, and COVID was in the air. And on this day, we had no idea that either of those things were happening.
Yeah, absolutely crazy to think about. And, COVID was in the air, and we probably should have known. We probably should have known more than we did. We should have, I think all of us, kind of regular folks had this sense that like, oh, we've heard the news reports about Ebola, and yeah, a few people are going to, get that. And like, it's a news story, but like, it doesn't affect anybody, that I know. We've heard the stories about, mad cow disease. We've heard the stories about H1N1 swine flu. And, I think most of us probably thought coronavirus was going to fall into that same category as a blip of, hey, like we run down these different like, diseases that happened. But what we didn't have in our leadership was any kind of competency and taking this seriously. And as a result of that, it wasn't Ebola, it wasn't H1N1, it wasn't mad cow disease. It turned out to be a pandemic that has cost the lives of more than 500,000 people. And so I think we were, jollily, tooling down the road in the vote down the road, bus,
literally,
having a good time, and assuming that our leadership was doing their job. And then we saw with, really kind of horrific consequences, what happens when, they don't. And we were in those days right before then, the end of February, we were at very large events. We were at a Trump rally. We were,
we
were at an Elizabeth Warren event. We were at, Joe Biden, not the Joe Biden events at that time were large.
The one in Iowa we were body pressed. I was, a foot and a half from the vice president. People just pressed on each other, laying all over, in the press area, literally the people press and the journalists all jammed in together. Like that all feels just like impossible today. Yeah. Think about it.
I know. And we had no idea that this disease that could kill all of us was in the air.
Yeah, something else. So I saw this recap or this old footage from a year ago today, and I thought we'd show it and chat about it. It's a reporter, NBC reporter, talking to Anthony Fauci, who then had to be introduced as to who he is. And I think this is just a really This is a moment. So here's a clip. Those who watch on the live stream will get to see it. Those in the audio, you'll hear it from 1 year ago.
National Institutes of Health, America's top virus control official, Dr. Anthony Fauci, says the coronavirus is spreading and America may need to take drastic actions.
What are we dealing with this coronavirus, COVID-19?
We're dealing with clearly an emerging infectious disease that has now reached outbreak proportions and likely pandemic proportions. If we get a major outbreak of this coronavirus in this country, that would mean perhaps closing schools temporarily, getting people to do more teleworking, canceling events where there is a lot of crowds in confined places, canceling unnecessary travel so that you're not on an airplane for 5 hours with a bunch of people who might be infected.
That would be a huge step. It would have enormous economic, societal, psychological implications.
It would, but it would be temporary, but it would be necessary.
Right.
Who is that guy? What's he talking about? That's nonsense. It's fear-mongering.
I remember sitting on the bus having a conversation with a few people, including Mia Pace, who was really tapped in. She was one of the members of our team, and she was really worried about this. And this is March 2nd at the time, and I remember being so naive and saying, "Look, if it's this bad, there's no way the federal government is not telling us." because we were having to make this. It was just now in the next week or so that we were going to be making decisions like, should we cancel events? Are states going to start canceling events? And everyone was scrambling. Remember those days? Yeah. No one knew. You couldn't figure out where to get information. And I was still, as opposed as I was to Donald Trump, as opposed as I think every person of good conscience and of good Christian will should have been to his not only way of behaving, but of course his cruelty and his politics. I was as opposed to him as I think a person could be. And yet I thought, even as bad as he is as a president, even as incompetent and cruel, there's no way the federal government could keep this silent, keep this covered up, and keep this as on the down low if it's as bad as people are saying. I was, of course, so wrong. It was that bad. He knew. We now know, to your point, we now know that he knew because I've heard the interviews that he did in February, nearly a month before this, saying to Bob Woodward, we know it's airborne. We know it's dangerous. We know it's going to kill people. They knew, and yet they kept it quiet. And look, as somebody who's not big into conspiracy theories and thinks that for the most part, most of them are designed as false narratives, it does kind of freak you out a little bit that the government kept this so quiet that up to March 2nd, there's a reporter talking to Fauci saying like, come on, really? You think we're going to shut things down? And Fauci's like, oh no, we're going to be shutting things down. You know, So, wow, you think a year ago, we had no idea who the candidate was going to be, but even more so, we didn't even know that this thing was coming, but it was starting to come above the surface. The signs were starting to show.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think there's two things that come to mind for me. One is, what we had in the Trump administration was what Trump allowed the kind of true believers of conservatism and small government, kind of that libertarian approach to things. Trump allowed them kind of full reign in all sorts of government agencies, and it's we talk at times, it's the bureaucracy is a dirty word, and we like to kind of rip on how terrible the bureaucracy is. The reality is that the bureaucracy, while often can be bloated for sure and make things more difficult, for sure, that's a possibility. The reality is that there is an apparatus within our federal government to handle crises, to handle things that are happening in the world, to prepare responses. Not everybody can be an expert about everything. And so we've got people within the government that are experts at different things that can provide their expertise at times of need. And what the libertarians did in the Trump administration is they dismantled all of that. So then we were without the apparatus that could respond effectively. And so you layer on top of the kind of conspiracy, like, oh, we're not going to tell them. We're also not going to respond effectively because we can't, because, the infectious disease centers around the world were dismantled by the Trump administration, in a variety of examples of that. And it's so, this isn't just like, this isn't like a, interesting political theory conversation to have on Facebook, or, hey, I read an Ayn Rand book and now I'm gonna, have a conversation with my friends over coffee and sound all smart. Like this is not like an intellectual exercise. This is not theoretical. This was life and death. And we had no idea how badly our government was bungling things.
And to your point, bungling it specifically as a choice, like saying we don't want the federal government to scare the people. This was Donald Trump's opinion. And then we don't want the federal government to start interfering on the states and what states are going to do, and that this is a states issue. And once again, it's as if we're in 1860 and we're having an argument about the economy and states' rights and individuals having the freedom in their states to buck the federal government, whether it was around issues of slavery in 1860 or issues of mandating a national health response in 2021. It's really a stunning moment where you saw come to fruition over the course of 2020 a vision of America, which was absolutely made worse by Donald Trump as the person in that role and his nonsense and personal incompetence. But the perspective that was much broader than just him, that was, we should dismantle the arms of the federal government so they stop being so intrusive. And then bragging about those things as if those were real accomplishments of their administration, right? So it is wow, a year ago, and now we're still picking up the pieces of all of this and trying to put it back together. Now, a new administration has been in place for 42 or 43 days, and are trying to put all this back together. Have they handled it in exactly the way that I would have hoped for? Well, no, there's lots of things I would have done that they would have done differently. But boy, it's a whole lot different than believing that the federal government basically needs to stand back and stand by like the Proud Boys and just wait for some other moment to be engaged. This chaos theory of we need non-professionals. We need someone who's not all, embroiled in the government to be the person in charge of the government. That's just generally a bad idea. I mean, I'm all for disruption. Disruption should happen, but the way you typically do disruption in systems is you have an outside force disrupting the structure. You don't typically turn the structure over to the person who wants to dismantle it. Yeah. And to give it to the libertarians and to give it to the anti-government, the Rand Pauls and Ted Cruz's and Josh Hawley's and that crowd to give them the power of Trump's nonsense. It's really just damaged us as a country.
It's the Ted Lasso approach. Have you watched Ted Lasso yet?
No.
You're going to get a kick out of this show. Ted Lasso is a show on Apple Plus where Jason Sudeikis plays a kind of mid-level D2 college football coach who gets hired to be the manager of a British football team, soccer team. And he goes over there and, he's a little bit like Ned Flanders come to life. But it's this total hey, we're going to put in charge of this team complete and utter incompetence and see what happens. And it's wholesome and wonderful and hilarious. And I highly recommend it for folks. It makes for good television. It makes for very bad governing. It may Veep is an entertaining show. Yeah, it's not the world we want to live in.
It's comedy. It's not. It's not governance. I mean, look.
When it actually happens, it's not comedy. It's tragedy.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And this is part of the. I don't want to relitigate 2016. The entire time on the Tuesday podcast, but one of the big arguments that was being made strongly back in 2016 was, and it's been an argument made over the course of time in American society, business leaders are better leaders than government leaders. And look, there are many sectors that make up our society. You and I have worked in the nonprofit sector, specifically in the religious area. I've owned a couple little businesses. I know lots of people that run. There are many ways to lead, and we need many skill sets to be leaders in our society. Being a business leader is a particular kind of skill set that is sometimes inborn to someone and oftentimes is taught by going to business school or earning a degree or sitting through seminars or reading books. Like, you learn a particular way to lead businesses. They are, for the most part, not good ways to lead, say, nonprofit organizations or art centers or relationships or
Yeah.
governments. Like
Yeah.
if we could have the conversation in the society that not every form of leadership fits every context, we would stop turning our nonprofits over to business leaders. We would stop turning our sports teams and our art endeavors over to business extracting profits notions, and we'd stop giving our government. Not to say business people shouldn't do really important things. They're extraordinarily important. But being good at one thing does not necessarily make you good at another thing.
Yeah.
Hence,
there
a football coach does not make a great senator from Alabama. Or
this
a
is true. And he
businessman who wasn't even a good football
Not-
coach.
not even a good football coach.
I've crossed into an arena I don't understand.
Yes, yeah. And in every one of those categories, nonprofit, church life, government, business, there are good and bad leaders in all of those. And the ability to tell what's a good and a bad leader isn't always like the success. Because, I mean, Doug, you and I both know, we have known leaders of mega churches that seem like, oh, well, they're great leaders. They're great people because, they lead this huge church. When the reality is they're terrible leaders and terrible human beings. And just because you're successful in some ways doesn't mean you're a leader. There's so many different factors that go into that. Like, I don't know, your dad giving you all the money and you're not actually being all that successful in business, but your personality. So you got a TV show where you play a successful person. That's not the same as being a successful person.
Right. And look, all leadership is hard. It's just hard.
Yes.
It's hard to do.
Yeah.
It takes a lot, and it's curvy and difficult. Yes. But the idea that business, that's where real success is. Like, oh my gosh, the things you have to worry about when you're running a business. And there's all kinds of businesses, right? There's small businesses. There's businesses that just you make your own decisions, like you're an individual entrepreneur owning your own place. Then there's businesses that are multinational corporations where you have to manage boards and clients across the globe. Those are totally different kinds of businesses. Anybody who's into business right now and is listening to me rant about how business leaders, they're just like, there's many kinds of businesses too. Totally get it. There's even many kinds of government, and there's many kinds of roles in the government. And there's certain roles, like the presidency is a one-off that is unlike any other role in our society. And the idea that, let's just hire the business people. And I'm not just talking about Donald Trump here, just sort of across the board. I think we need to talk about the notions that go into how we select our leaders. Speaking of that, I have one more clip that I saw from watching the news programs over the weekend. And this is the current Homeland Security Director talking about immigration in the United States. And I think this is an important part as we transition out of this piece of our conversation. He basically says, well, I don't know if I'm going to ruin it for you, but he basically says, the previous administration, the Trump administration, dismantled our immigration system to the degree that it's almost non-functional.
What did I just say?
By design, they did it. And here's someone agreeing with you.
The prior administration dismantled our nation's immigration system in its entirety. Quite frankly, the entire system was gutted. It takes time to build out of the depths of cruelty that the administration before us established. We have begun to develop and rebuild the program to reunify individuals with their families here in the United States, as was once the case.
The Department of Homeland Security Director says it's nearly impossible to understand the cruelty by which they approached dismantling the immigration system in this country, of which immigration has been an essential part of the American story and will be a part of the American future. And to rip that apart is fundamentally to have torn apart a central piece of the United States of America. So when people ask, and somebody on Facebook's asking, how can you as Christian people support Democrats? This is why. because there is a cruelty inside of current Republican ideology, there is an incompetence inside of current Republican practice, and there is a devastating to the American imagination happening inside of the practices of the Republican parties, of the Republican Party. And it's just, I may have said Democrat there, I meant Republican Party on all of those points. The Republican Party is in a stage right now that is just outrageous, that it really does feel like we can't get around it. And I know you want to talk about Comic-Con, otherwise known as CPAC, that took place this weekend. So maybe this is a good point to pile on that one.
Yeah, if we're talking about like the utter gut rot that is the Republican Party at this point, conspiracy theory Comic-Con is the place we can start. I mean, this. My mouth is agape. I'm almost at a loss for words about how ridiculous and on the nose this CPAC, which is the Conservative Political Action Committee, which is like the annual gathering of the politically active conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
And air quotes for those of you that are just listening to the audio version of this. And happened in Orlando. And I mean, we could talk about the gold statue of Donald Trump being wheeled in for people to, get their selfies with, evoking, for all of us, all sorts of references to the golden calf and, idol worship. And here is finally like in symbolic form, the opportunity to bow down before Donald Trump, as so many have in a figurative sense. Now they can do it literally. And my absolute favorite part of that gold statue is that Trump was wearing flip-flops.
And like Stars and Stripes shorts, like Rocky Balboa in flip-flops.
Do you think Donald Trump's ever in his life worn flip-flops? Like, oh, it's just hilarious. So, I mean, that's one thing. Can we talk about the stage? The stage, have you heard about this? Do you know about this, Doug?
Well, I saw that the layout of it matched identical to Nazi symbolism.
Yes. And I personally, for whatever reason, unlike Congressman Cawthorn, who apparently is an expert in Nazi history and has, posted pictures on Instagram of himself visiting Hitler's eagle's nest, and I did not know that.
For or against Nazism? Where does he find himself on the spectrum? For, against, or just a student of?
Well, he would claim against, but come on.
Okay. Yeah.
Come on. Lots to think about there. I mean, I did not know what the symbol was. I did not, I wouldn't have looked at that and thought, it looked to me like, something out of like Space Invaders or something, from, one of those little, aliens coming down in the Space Invaders game from when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And then you realize like, oh, this actually is, as people begin to, share screenshots and side by side with, pictures of the collar of Nazi soldiers. And you go, all of a sudden you realize like, oh no, they actually did make this stage to look exactly like that. Like what are they thinking? And again, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist about this. I don't want to think like, I don't want to find like, crazy symbolism where there isn't one, but like it
makes you ask yourself, yep. Did they not?
Yeah. And
did they not see it? Did they not care, or did they see it and care? Right. It feels like these are
did they not see it?
Right. Like, was the stage designed in a way that nobody went up above where the camera angles are and looked down on it and said, and what we're talking about here is CPAC, which is this little, very fringy side of the conservative movement that has a yearly gathering together to sort of gin up conservatism in America. And they had a conference in Orlando. And at this conference, they laid out this stage in a way, trying to have social distancing. And when you look at it, it is not only in the shape of of Nazi symbolism, but as Rob puts it, nearly identical. So
yeah, and you just said, did they not see it?
Yeah. So I guess one of the options is
very cleverly, very clever. Do you get it?
No,
not
I don't.
See, not
oh,
see,
not see it, not
see.
see it.
You're making jokes and you don't even realize it.
My pun ability is so pure, it's just melded with me. Did they not see it, or did they not see it? Boy, that's thank you for that. That is
thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Stop
So,
clock humor right there.
Donald Trump takes the stage following, Ted Cruz, who cracks a joke about how, Orlando is not quite as nice as Cancun because he's an idiot. And Donald Trump takes the stage and has a long, boring speech. And here's the dirty little secret about Donald Trump. His speeches are long and boring. And other than the little sound bites that get clipped out of them, they're long and boring. And I have, personally walked out of a couple of them.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, he basically declares himself the leader of the Republican Party, which he is, asks for money from his followers so that he can support candidates running for Congress in 2022 and use this as his opportunity to kind of reemerge and criticize the Biden administration as well as those Congress people and senators who voted for his impeachment and his conviction. Really quite a weekend.
And to me, big takeaway is Donald Trump isn't going anywhere. He's not going away. Trumpism isn't going to die. Now, on the other hand, I heard a good argument recently that said, look, even popular political movements have a hard time holding on. Reaganism, they really wanted to last. It after Reagan, Republicans lose 7 out of 8 elections or something like this. Obama, there's supposed to be a sea change, and after 8 years, it loses steam. You could even say Clintonism, which was supposed to be a response after George H.W. Bush's time as president. That was supposed to be a whole change, and things were going to be, and it loses steam. You're into the Bush administration. So maybe it just is that in the United States, political efforts and movements just don't last that long. And maybe in this case, that's going to be our saving grace, right? That that we can work hard for the next 2 to 4 years and really, really see the pain that the approach of Trump has been on this country really wax and wane and drift away.
Yeah, from your mouth to God's ear.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm sort of hopeful. But I'll also say, look, people make these choices. People make these decisions. And right now, there is the battle to me is not about being a Democrat or Republican. The battle is between the insurrectionists and those who don't want an insurrection. And I hope, and I will spend the next 2 years trying to remind people that on January 6th, a group of Trump-supporting people, supported by current members of Congress in the House and the Senate, were ginned up, called forward, and attacked the Capitol building while the Electoral College votes were being counted to try to stall off or to prevent the free and fair election in this country. That is what we're facing. And if we think that that thing is going to pass, that's just a political movement that's going to go, that's the perennial. That's the thing that's going to stay around. Whether Trumpism does or not, I don't know. Whether he is sort of seen in his aging days and when he doesn't have the power of the apparatus of the presidency, whether or not he's going to be someone that people pay attention to as important, I don't know. But this other thing that has found its feet in Charlottesville and then found its feet in the insurrection and is being talked about as the 1776 of the imagination of the insurrectionists in this country, that piece, the QAnon kind of movement that really roots itself all the way back into, the the 9/11 conspiracy narratives that were ginned up in this country in a whole new way. That I would not just did we land on the moon or what have we done with our vaccines or what's out in Area 51, but a whole different kind of narrative around this country. And that thing that we think just, popped out of nowhere didn't come out of nowhere. It actually has been curated over time, often by people that we work a lot with, which is the white Christian nationalist movement. That crowd, not work with, but work to be a counter to, that white Christian nationalist movement, that thing, that is well ensconced in our society and has itself deeply embedded in homeschool curriculum, in Christian school curriculum. Not saying that every Christian school, every homeschool is buying that stuff, but you got to work around it to have it not be in your curriculum. I promise you, start looking at that stuff. And leaders and pastors and other people that are in the Christian subculture, you better start looking pretty carefully, because I promise you the narratives of white nationalism white Christian nationalism are so deeply embedded in these narratives. There's that it is a foot soldier producing movement, and we have to really that's the part that to me has proven itself. And I feel like, to flash back to March 2nd on Super Tuesday, sitting on the bus saying, well, we don't know which of these people are going to be part of the Democratic nomination process, and we didn't know that the COVID virus that was being rumored was as deadly as it was, and I was naive about the impact of that. That feels very similar to where I was on the morning of January 6th. Right. I knew this virus was in the air. Insurrectionists, the white Christian nationalists were on the prowl. We had run into them many, many times. They show up on our live streams. They chatted up on here all the time. But I thought, there's no way they're as dangerous as all that, just like I thought about the COVID virus, COVID-19. And I was wrong about that, and don't want to be wrong about this again. So I think we need to keep our eyes on that prize all the way through.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I'm glad you mentioned homeschool curriculum and Christian school curriculum, because you're absolutely true. That is where that's where the propaganda lives. That's where the brainwashing happens. That's where, as you said, the foot soldiers are made. And, and beyond that, I don't think we can underestimate, the long-term impact that Rush Limbaugh had in radicalizing a whole generation of people to sit behind the golden EIB microphone for 3 hours every day, typically without guests, and just talk and talk and talk and talk and reinforce this narrative, and to be so widely accepted in those same communities. My hope is that now that Rush is gone, that his impact will be difficult to replicate in a new form. And so it's quite a state that we find ourselves in, but I'm with you that, we're not and I've said this in a variety of different forums. I'm not moving on from January 6th until there's justice. We have got to keep talking about this. There are other things to talk about. We need to talk about where are the stimulus checks, the $1,400 or $2,000 stimulus checks, depending on what you believe. What are we going to do about minimum wage? Why the hell are we bombing Syria? Why are there still kids in cages and we're just calling them something different now? There's a lot to talk about. But we have got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We cannot move on from January 6th until there's justice, because if we do, remember after 9/11, all those times we would say, well, if this happens, then the terrorists win. If we move on from January 6th without there being justice, the insurrectionists win. And it's the future of our democracy that's at stake.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I don't think there's an appetite inside the congressional stomach to really deal with this. I know they've been talking about it, and they've been floating this, 9/11-like commission. But even that, referencing it, we have to go to 9/11, Let's have an insurrection-like commission. How about that? How about if we come up with what it needs to be to answer this question? Because what we had to look into around 9/11 was a whole lot of confusion that was coming from many sources. This one is different. This call came from within the house. There literally were people in the building who were ginning up the people outside the building, and there was a guy down the street who stood in front of a rally and said, "Get them." That is not the same thing, and something is holding up this clear-eyed investigation of this. I don't know what it is. I don't know why people don't want to get after it, but boy, I even, as somebody who, like you, has committed myself to saying in the political conversation and social conversations, I'm going to bring up January 6th, the insurrection, when those people did that thing, partly because it's so close to the work that we do and my own passion about Christian people who were absolutely behind this. And for people who don't know, you can watch the video. We have it all over our social streams. The people inside the dais baptized it and prayed in the name of Jesus and thanked Jesus for giving them access to rebirth America through this insurrection. So they believed it was God ordained. They believed they were sent by Jesus and the president to do these things. And that has to be addressed. And even as somebody who's totally committed to this, I want to talk about it, ongoing. It's really hard because everybody else wants to move on. And look, the COVID success stories that we're going to see over the next 6 months are going to be significant. And we're all going to feel, figuratively and literally, a breath of fresh air when we can start to engage with one another in ways that feel more humane than what we're able to do right now. But boy, the people who just don't want to talk about this, they just want to move on. I don't hear lawmakers crying out daily about this. Why were the actors not prevented from acting the way that they acted? They knew it was coming. And maybe the answers are already out there that, look, we thought these were the good guys. We believed that Trump supporters and who show up are former military and a bunch of police and that crowd, and they're not going to do damage. And that myth, that great idea that if you served in the police, you served in the military, that somehow gives you a pass. We look over the course of our history of violence in this country done of citizen upon citizen. And whether it's back to Timothy McVeigh or you look at the multiple shooters, the shootings that happen at military bases, we are training up people, and the insurrectionists were a disproportionate number of people were in the military and in the police force that were part of that insurrection group. This is what makes it so dangerous for us. And we just have to be able to talk about this in our society in a way that is honest. And we don't seem to want to do it in our society. There's a lot of things about us in our culture that we don't want to look at, from racism to the pain of financial unfair distribution, to white supremacy and white nationalism that's rooted inside of our most deepest structures of this country, and those that have military weapons and military training.
Yeah, absolutely. And along with that, in addition to the kind of pass we typically give, veterans and police officers, there is a not so subtle racism that goes along with that too, that like, oh, these white people, they're not gonna get out of hand. And there are so many things about what happened on January 6th, from the Christian nationalism to the racism to all of these issues, all of these things that we care about, whether it's guns, how we solve problems, whether it's, healing the divide that exists in the nation, all of these different things, are present at what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. And we can't just move on.
And it's less than 2 months ago, right? It'll be 2 months tomorrow, I guess. And it feels like a lifetime ago, it just feels like, oh yeah, that happened back in the winter. That feels like it's gone. And we have to stay on it. Hey, other things happening in politics. Look, because you did a beautiful laundry list of them that I think are worth us noting. In addition to the bombing of Syria, which again, the idea that our administrations come in and for some reason in the first few months, they feel like they need to drop munitions on countries. It is so disappointing to me. And we just have to stay on it. And the Biden administration, I think, has to answer for it. And the other thing I want them to have to answer for is why they're going so easy on the crown prince of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
They now did this big report, and they conclude that the crown prince ordered the killing of the journalist Khamenei, and that they want to be sure that the people who did it are punished. So they've sanctioned and put out, effect on the people who actually did the gruesome murder of him, but then are giving what I feel is, and other people are saying the same thing, is somewhat of a pass to the crown prince. Like they're not saying, hey, Saudi Arabia, this guy who's the crown prince, which means he's the next in line to be the king, if you make him king, you're going to pay a price in this country. We're doing the opposite of that. And like, let's go easy with the Saudis. We can find a way to work this out. Like why we continue in this country to allow Saudi Arabia to violate the human rights that we don't allow any other country to violate, and then to be as brazen as they are in their actions and not do anything about it is really concerning. And I did not think the Biden administration was going to take a tack like this. And when they said they were announcing this big investigation into what happened, I thought it was they were preparing to do something about it. And they say they have. And I'm like, this doesn't seem like what a country says, especially to its political friends. Like if you can't say to your political friends, you've got to deal with this or we're going to deal with it, and you're only tough on your enemies and not tough on your friends, that's how the country ends up in all kinds of international agreements that don't benefit humanity, don't benefit societies, and certainly don't benefit the planet.
Yeah, I think, what we're seeing from the Biden administration, this is goes back to, something that, became an adage. Maybe it was older than this, but I just started paying attention to it like during the Trump administration. That was like, when people tell you who they are, believe them. Like people will tell you who they are. And, Trump told us he was a white supremacist, and we wanted to be like, oh, well, he doesn't really mean that. And like, no, he really was. And, Joe Biden said, nothing will fundamentally change. Like nothing will fundamentally change. And what we have in Joe Biden is a career politician, a longtime member of government, someone who's known to be a moderate, a centrist, not like principled in a policy way, like that, like he's not Bernie Sanders. He's not Elizabeth Warren. Like and when he says nothing will fundamentally change, like we really should have believed him. And so what we see with our relationship with Saudi Arabia is nothing fundamentally changing. And that is so disappointing because there is this, terrible murder of this journalist, and so many human rights concerns. And yet at the same time, I'm like, there's part of me that is like, okay, that's disappointing. I would love for us to stand for human rights and for justice around the world. And then, but even at the same time, we're having a hard enough time standing for human rights and justice here in our own country. Like, are we really qualified to be like the moral police of the world? No, we're not. So, there's a lot to unpack, but I'm with you that there is some significant disappointment, but we should have known because Joe Biden told us what he was going to do. And that was that nothing was fundamentally going to change.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people saw that in very positive sense, right? They had seen the disruption from our previous conversation of that administration, and what the country was not longing for a lot of people was a revolution, right? What the country was longing for was normalcy. Returning to, from the pandemic through the nightmare of the administration, to the economy that felt like it had got tilted by this crazy tax cut that was given to the billionaires and so on. Like people were longing for that. And this is, and I think you're right. It's a great point. When politicians tell us who they are, we shouldn't recast it into the vision that we want them to be, right? We should believe them when they tell us, because they do tend to tell you, right? The disappointment is not in them not matching what they said. The disappointment is in them doing precisely what they said, right? And it wasn't enough, and we all put our hopes and imaginations on politicians more than we want. But we also have to look at ourselves and say, is it possible that the United States is in a place in 2020 to 2024 where it's going to be a settling and stabilizing period of time rather than a disruption period of time? Yeah. And if that's the case, what does that prepare us for? In other words, is this a season? Is this a period of time when something needs to happen? Now, I thought we were on the verge, and I hope we are, of a racial reckoning in this country that's going to push through into a whole lot of areas of our systems and of our structures. Not entirely clear that's happening. Not entirely clear that's happening at all. I mean, if you think that January 6th felt like a long time ago, try May 31st, the murder of George Floyd right down the street from where I'm sitting right now. And that is has now become sort of an episode that people reference. You know, you and I were talking before we came on about the Bruce Springsteen and Barack Obama podcast that is now out, where the two of them talk about issues of our day. They recorded it sometime between the election and the insurrection, but they talk about the killing of George Floyd as a catalytic moment that did something in our society. And it could be that that's a catalytic moment of racial reckoning. And it could be that it's just one of the chronicled periods that allow us to return to normalcy, right? That you can refer to and say, well, we lived through that one and now we moved on. That was, even that can feel like it was so long ago. And it was less than 9 months ago. A period of time that should be that should be hard to have forgotten of any of this. So we're in a moment in our history where we have to ask ourselves, what's the political moment? Where do we find ourselves? And as we talk about politics in this, a lot of us have felt so disturbed by the last 4 years. Other people felt very enthralled by the last 4 years. Mm-hmm. And very, enlivened. Even the people who, agree with Trump but thought he was chaotic, they loved that, right? They're like, that's what we want him for. Well, now we're in a period where I don't know what the country really wants. It'll be interesting in this election that you and I are going to work so hard on in 2022 to be sure that the insurrectionist party doesn't have the ability to conjure up imagination. Is it going to be
Can I say a word about 2022? And that in the midterms, and Doug, you and I have talked about this, and so for our listeners, listen, we need to strap in, like put on your seatbelts. Like if you think, well, Donald Trump's been defeated and everything's going to be okay now, and like things are going back to normal, listen. 2022 is going to be a really significant election. What typically happens in the first midterm election when Congress, the House of Representatives, for those that might not know, the House of Representatives, every single seat in the House is up for re-election every 2 years. And so when we talk about midterms, that's the House of Representatives election that happens in between the two presidential elections. There's also at that point, there typically are some governor's races, there's some Senate races, but control of the House of Representatives is up for grabs, and control of the Senate, which is now 50-50, will be up for grabs yet again. A couple of the Democrats that just won, like Raphael Warnock and Mark Kelly, are both up for election again in 2022 because they are filling out previous terms. So, what I say all of that to say, like, what is going to happen in 2022 is tremendously important. And what typically happens in midterm elections is the party that is not in power, whatever party the president is, the opposite party of that. So in this case, Joe Biden's a Democrat, so we're talking about the Republicans. Typically, in midterm elections, the opposition party, the minority party, wins big. It's happened over and over and over again. It happened to Barack Obama. It happened to George W. Bush. It happened to Bill Clinton. It happened to Ronald Reagan. It happened to Donald Trump. And it is very likely to happen to Joe Biden. And if the Republicans win big, and they win big with Trump-backed congressional candidates who are pro-insurrection, the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Lauren Boeberts, the Ted Cruzes, the Josh Hawleys of the Republican Party, if that is the Republicans that get elected to Congress, can you imagine where we're headed? Like it is. And so I say all of this to say, we have got a lot of work ahead of us to do in the next 2 years to blunt that from happening. That if we do not do that work, like what the chaos that happened on January 6th could be replicated in November of 2022 at the ballot box. And that is a really scary proposition for the future of the country. This is far from over.
And not only is it the historic pattern, if you just look at the last 2 elections, and again, people in the House of Representatives are elected every 2 years. I know it can sound a little perfunctory if you know all this, but Rob, you and I, having traveled the country and talked to thousands of voters, a lot of people don't know what the calendar is. So they don't know the phrase midterm, which be better if we didn't call it a midterm, because then it makes it seem as if the election that matters is the presidential one and everything else is the one in between. It's like referring to a half marathon. There's no reason to call it half of a marathon. It's a full 13 miles. Call it 13 miles, not half. I mean, right? Like
that's a lot. That's nothing for you, but for some of us, that's a lot.
That's a long way. Let it be its own thing. Don't make it derivative of something else. And calling a midterm says to people like, well, this one's kind of middle-ish. It sort of only kind of matters. And it used to be, right, when Democrats held there was like some period of time the Democrats for 40 years held the House of Representatives, didn't matter. And then in 1992 that changed. And since then there's been ping-ponging around. Every 2 years the election of the House of Representatives is going to happen. And 2 years ago it happened, with 2018, and then in 2020. Democrats won 40 seats in 2018. We were out on the road doing a lot of work, had a lot to do with Trump, had a lot to do with the shift in this country. And then they lost a bunch of seats, Democrats did, in 2020. So not only is this a historic pattern you're pointing out, the last election, Democrats lost seats. In 2018, they gained a whole bunch. So if it just happens what just happened 3-4 months ago, there's serious trouble on the horizon for people like you and I who want to make sure that the insurrectionist party is not supported. And that's who the Republican candidates are going to be. Across the board, the people running for Congress as Republicans, and especially those who are running against seated Democrats, those Republicans are going to be the kinds of people that are part of this base, because that's the people who run for office in the half marathon midterm times of the election cycle. So this is a very real set of conditions that we find ourselves in. And that's why talking about this is important. That's why the work that Vote Common Good does is crucial. And basically without us, democracy is over. So if you don't share this podcast, if you don't share this live stream, if you don't make your contribution today, I mean, that's it. That's it. And it's just as simple. You support us or your democracy is over. It's
the one singular hope for the country
is
Vote Common Good.
And we're doing the best we can. But we need to all be.
So this has been kind of a look back kind of podcast at, where we are now compared to January 6th, where we are now compared to May 31st, where we are now compared to Super Tuesday a year ago. Let me ask you this. 1 year ago today, we're on the, how many masks did you own?
Well, I had the one from that film with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman.
Right? Like, isn't
yeah.
it crazy how now I own 6 or 7 masks that I
Oh yeah, yeah.
did not
They've
own
become.
before.
I have a wardrobe decision to make about
Yes.
masks I'm wearing, and
No, it's something that just, it's crazy how things change. And I, trying to, maybe land the plane here on a more lighter note,
it
the
is one
mask
of the.
industry. If a year ago we had invested in masks, you'd
And
be
I just heard
able
this
to-
morning that Zoom, the conferencing software, since last year at this time in March, they've earned $1 billion, which is 1,000 times more than they earned the year previous. Between masks and Zoom meetings, or as Anthony Fauci said it in that clip that some people were telling me they had a hard time hearing, teleconferencing, that the like Zoom meeting thing and wearing masks, it's amazing how as a society and as a global society, we've shifted to this.
Yeah.
You look around the world and like human beings that are so resistant to change, so unable to make right about things that are wrong, somehow have shifted to a protocol of staying apart, wearing masks, and we have done it. There's something just slightly hopeful that we can really do things and change real hard, fast behaviors and add in different behaviors. It's kind of incredible that has happened. So to your point, in a year, and masks have actually even been less than a year. Like, I don't know. I don't think we had to wear a mask in Minnesota until like May or late April or something. Like there was argument if masks were, the way this goes or not. Back, just about a year ago, we were wiping down every package that came into our house. And we've set that aside. Well, some people I know still do that, but most of us have set that aside because we recognize that's not how the virus is passed. But we picked up masks in less than a year and just normalized it into our life and our society, and have built an entire industry around it. So maybe, just maybe, the kind of changes we want to see are actually possible. Absolutely. Hey, thanks for being a part of this. Again, we appreciate all. If you're new to us here on the live stream and you haven't picked up the podcast yet, boy, it helps us a lot if you do. And if you only listen on the podcast and you'd come over to a live stream and share it with a friend, we'd love for you to do that. You can find it at all the places where you find the good works of Vote Common Good. And if you're on our email list, notice that we're sending out a new weekly roundup in addition to our 2 other emails a week. And it includes an In for 10 invitation. We'd love for you to be in with us. So check out the In for 10 project going on at Vote Common Good. Thank you, Rob. We'll talk to you soon. Tomorrow we're back with Vote Common Good's daily podcast, Common Good Faith. And we will talk to you in the morning, and we'll see you all then.